We're gathered here at this conference for global peace and coexistence. I heard that part 1 was very informative and productive. Let us begin part 2 of the program where we're going to discuss the actual cases, and I look forward to in-depth discussions. But I'd like to once again remind the speakers and panelists to stick to the allocated time because we have short and allocated time, so please stick to your schedule. Let me introduce myself. I am Kim Hankuk. I'm currently serving as the spokesperson of the Gyeonggi province. I will be moderating the second session where we have 3 presentations on Nogunri incident and the story of a former German Prime Minister Willy Brandt. I would like to invite the presenters. I'm going to assign each presenter 15 minutes. I'd like to ask for your understanding. We need time for roundtable discussion later, so I'd like to ask each presenter to limit its presentation to 50 minutes. The first presenter is Chung Do from the Nogunri International Peace Foundation. He's going to discuss the DMZ and Nogunri in history and memory for reconciliation and harmonization. The second presenter is Wolfram Hoffenstedt from the Willy Brandt Foundation. The title is Public History and the Use of Archival Material. And the third presenter is Professor No Myung-hwan of HUB's Department of History, Information, and Archival Science. He's also leading the Society on History, Korean Society of Archival Information and Cultural Studies. The topic is DMZ and the Nogunri and President Kim Dae-jung's peace philosophy. I'd now like to invite Mr. Chung. Please limit your presentation to 15 minutes. After 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a notice. Then you would have to wrap up within 5 minutes. So, Mr. Chung, please go ahead.
Good evening. I am Chairman Chung Do of Nogunri International Peace Foundation. Can you all hear me well? The moderator asked me to please talk within the time limit. I will try to do that to my best, but I have a recommendation. I think we have 40 minutes allotted for the discussion, so if I could have 2 to 3 more minutes than 15 minutes, that would be helpful. Nogunri massacre is well known around the world. There are many stories behind it. Nogunri incident was released to the world not because of the Korean government or the US government, but it was a process of victim-centered activities. So the title of my presentation is Process of Victim-Centered Activities for the Truth of the Nogunri Incident. This is the summary. On July 25th, 1950, that is 1 month after the Korean War erupted, in Chungcheong, North Chungcheong Yeongdong-gun, Hagari area and Nogunri area, there was a US troops air attack to civilians. And there was also shooting of US troops to civilians of Korean, and about 400 people were killed. According to the investigation carried out by the Korean government, there were about 72% of the victims were women and children. And there was an investigation search done by the Korean government and the US government, and it was like the fight between David and Goliath. When it was first released to the world was due to my father, Chung Eun-yong. He is a victim. Well, actually, our family is a victim of the Nogunri massacre. He has lost 2 children, and also my mother has been fatally hurt due to the massacre. And what he did was he went to the US Compensation Office in Korea in 1960 and requested for investigation, but it was refused because it was belated, according to their assertion. And what my father did after that was he came up with a medium-length novel, The Abandoned People. And there was the time of the Sixth Republic, and that was a time when we couldn't talk against the US. So that's why he opted for the literary method. And then in 1994, he writes the full-length novel, Do You Know Our Pain? And that was the time when I started to join this Nogunri investigation in earnest. My father had written a story based on truth, and I was able to read that novel. And by looking at that novel, I was greatly shocked and I was angered. An ally of Korea, the US troops, have killed hundreds of Korean civilians. I was really furious. And I was a doctorate student and I was writing my thesis, but I gave up on my studies for 2 years and I participated in the novel writing process with my father for 2 years. On my left side, you can see my father, and at the background, you can see the Nogunri tunnel. So in 1994, after the novel was published, we came up with the Nogunri Committee for Victims, and we started in earnest for the fact-finding activities. And then we sent 20 petitions to Korea and the US government, as well as National Assembly. But we were ignored by the Korean government as well as the US government. The president of the US at that time was Clinton, and Joe Biden was the head of the Senate. But I didn't get any reply back from them. But the reply first I got was from the Department of Defense of the US. The answer that I got was a whitewash, that the US troops were not stationed at Nogunri area. But at that time, I had the proof that the US were stationed at the area. So I sent that proof and I received another lie that it wasn't true. But anyways, in order to expose this issue to the world, what I did was I tapped to the press and the media, and I also did academic studies alongside. So I accumulated information related to Nogunri, and for about 4 years and a half, I presented it and sent it to the media. And in 1998, AP journalists started to cover the Nogunri incident. I also did some academic research. I worked with a historian and I came up with this writing and this thesis. This was 7 months before AP journalist comes up with the investigation findings. And in this thesis, after writing this thesis, I also wrote a thesis on international law. And in 1999, September, AP released its investigation coverage of Nogunri case. And CNN, NBC, New York Times of the US, and major media broadcasted about Nogunri incident. And the Nogunri massacre became big news in the global media. And the Korean government and the US government starts the fact-finding investigation. And in 2000, AP team receives the Pulitzer Media Award, which is considered to be a Nobel Prize of the media. You can see that the AP investigative report, which was the bridge of Nogunri. So thanks to the AP coverage, for 1 year and 3 months, the Korean government and the US government starts the fact-finding investigation. But the US government found it very difficult because doing the research from their perspective was like opening a Pandora's box. It's because US was an international policeman, but now if they open this Pandora box, then it could hurt their image. So they didn't really have the will or intention to cooperate in earnest. You can see how when the US troops and the investigation team came to the tunnel. Here, this is how the two governments conducted the fact-finding investigation. After 1 year and 3 months of research, they came up with a report, and the US government, the President Clinton, didn't offer an official apology, but he gave a report of regret. But however, it was still a very good result because the US didn't even provide these type of a letter of regret to other countries' cases. And this was possible because we did this movement centered around victims. And also the US troops or the US government said that they would give $4 million for the memorial building. They said they would build a memorial tower and also provide scholarship to the students, but we didn't agree to accept it. It's because there were about 368 cases committed by the US, but they didn't research into the other 368 cases, but they only researched into Nogunri case. And if they build a memorial tower based on Nogunri, we believe that other cases would also be included in the memorial project. So we refused to accept the $4 million grant from the US. We didn't want the US to know that they have actually given us compensation in some way, but we didn't think that was the right way forward, so we didn't accept that. I think in some sense, it is against the Nogunri spirit, which is about truth, reconciliation, and reprocessing. And because we weren't able to receive compensation from the US government nor the Korean government, we came up with this movement to come up with the special act. And the victims all worked together, and as a result, we were able to have the special act passed in the National Assembly. And this was a very important law in the history of the re-examination of past history for truth. So Korea said that there are 226 victims and about 2,000 bereft families. Anyways, Nogunri movement was meaningful in that it was victim-centered activities, and we can see that it is a representative case of civilian sacrifice during the Korean War. There's other 368 cases that the US attacked Korean civilians, but the Nogunri incident was the most representative. And it was also a war of history between Korea and the US. And because of time limit, I don't think I can go into more detail. And also, it was very meaningful in that Nogunri cases brought about other history-related problems, and also there was a framework act that was built on the re-examination of past history for truth reconciliation. So it was indeed a very important case. And also, once again, I said President Clinton has made his announcement of regret, and that was something that the US don't usually do. So it was another achievement that we have made. And we do other activities to console the victims of other wars and other massacres. For example, we did the fundraising for Iraqi children. And also, there was a case when we linked with the American Christian community to restore honor and have reconciliation events. This was in 1999 when we met in Cleveland in the US. And in 2016, the US Church Association gives us an opportunity for reconciliation. And in 2020 November, 3 Korean War veterans, or the family of the 3 veterans, came to Korea to the Nogunri Peace Park, and we had a special event for reconciliation and healing. It was meaningful that it was during the time of COVID-19. And after the service that we did with the US veterans, we held our hands together for reconciliation. We also have established the Nogunri Peace Awards, and starting from 2008, every year we provide awards to people in the areas of human rights, journalism, and literature. And Nogunri Symphonic Cantata, it is a cantata that is made to console the victims of Nogunri. Professor Hwa Sun-bun, who have studied in Germany, has come up with music, and I composed the poetic lyrics. This is the Nogunri Peace Academy for World University students. Students from all around the world come to Nogunri Park, and we have this camp to enhance the understanding of the younger generation on peace and coexistence. We have established the Nogunri Peace Park about 10 years before. About 33 acres of land have been used to create this Nogunri Peace Park. We have the Nogunri Monument, Education Center, the Sculpture Park, the Rose Park, as well as a resting place. About 200,000 people comes to visit this place to learn about human rights and peace. You can see the Nogunri Peace Park major facilities. There's the monument and the center, the memorial center, the education center, and the rose garden. Other than the events that I have mentioned, we also hosted international peace conferences. 200 people from 35 countries in September 2014 came to Nogunri Peace Park to have the International Peace Forum. And at Imjingak, we also had the peace declaration announcing ceremony. And last year was the 70th year of Nogunri incident, 70th anniversary of the Korean War. And we had a commemorative forum, and we made the Global Peace Forum part of the national agenda of the Moon Jae-in government. The event was reduced and delayed a little bit due to COVID-19, but we did have it on as a hybrid conference, online and offline. And last year, we did a number of important publications last year, especially we published books on Nogunri incident. We translated these books. There were full-length novels that my father has written that was translated, and also we came up with a booklet that is about Nogunri incident, which I have translated for the international audiences. Future tasks for reconciliation and coexistence. We still didn't get compensation, and we still have this law to be revised in the process of being passed in the National Assembly. Last year, we worked to have the Korea-US Washington International Exchange event for reconciliation and healing, but because of COVID-19, it was not possible. We believe that if COVID-19 is resolved, we'll be able to have this international exchange in which the victim and the perpetrators can come together for reconciliation and for coexistence. Third, this is actually a very important incident. We are trying to build a memorial for the US veterans in Chungbuk, Yeongdong. In North Chungcheong, Yeongdong, there was heated battle between the US and North Korea, and there were about 900 US troops were killed. But unfortunately, there aren't no monuments that remembers their sacrifice. We have to remember that there were these US soldiers who have killed themselves to save the freedom of Korea. And we don't have a memorial park for them. So if possible, we hope that in the future in Yeongdong, we could have a memorial tower or a monument for the US victims. Fourth, what we want to do is to have fact-finding investigation in other US-related incidents during the Korean War. I said that there's about 368 other cases during the Korean War. I hope that I'm able to share the know-how that I have with the people so that they can improve their studies. Now, let me conclude. This is my father who has passed away, and his obituary actually filled the headlines of many US newspapers. It was on the US newspaper as well as the French newspaper. And the fact that he was placed in these international news obituary means that he has actually contributed greatly to the value of human rights. And I think this was indeed meaningful. During the process, we had a lot of difficulties. We were stigmatized as being anti-American, and during the 30 years of Korean military dictatorship and pro-US government, we had a hard time. And we were attacked, not by only the government, but also other people. But the victims did not end there and did not stop there. And that Nogunri spirit, I believe, brought about the Nogunri story exposed to the world today. My mother is 95 years old, and she is a victim of the Nogunri massacre. She's still alive. She is still suffering from the Nogunri trauma. I think my mother will suffer from trauma until the end of her time in this world. I think the significance of Nogunri case is that there should not be another war on the Korean Peninsula. The last recommendation I want to make is to have a human rights and peace chain. There are many war sites, Nogunri site, Germans, Berlin Wall, Ypres in Belgium, Normandy in France, DMZ, and so forth. There are these war sites, and also the Holocaust sites. I hope that we are able to make this into a chain so that we can make a human rights and peace chain. I hope that the France and Woodrow Wilson Foundation, the Berlin Willy Brandt Foundation, and the Berlin Wall Foundation, as well as other foundations, join hands. Nogunri and DMZ could be connected, and we could wish for a peaceful reunification and use it as a place to promote peace. For example, we could have a peace concert in Nogunri and DMZ, and we could have people from Germany, people from Korea come and participate in the concert. We could also have a peace marathon in Nogunri and DMZ, and we could have these events hold to promote the Korean division and pursue peace and coexistence. And also, if we could have a DMZ eco park and peace park, then it could help the improvement of peace in the world, not only the Korean Peninsula. With this, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
경구도, thank you very much. I wish I could give you more time, but thank you very much for limiting your presentation, but you spent 25 minutes. Thank you for allowing me that much of time. I really appreciate that. I was very inspired by your manuscript, and you worked with your father, and you carry out the victim-based activities for fact-finding, and you successfully received apology and the expression of regret from the US president, and you made proposals of creating the human rights and peace chain and other ideas. Thank you very much. And I believe that your work has been very significant and valuable. I hope that next time we can hear more from your experience. And concert, wonderful idea. I know a very talented soprano singer, so I will do my part. Chungcheong North Province and yes, Gyeonggi Province, we can join hands together. Yes, Governor Lee Jae-myung of Gyeonggi Province is very involved and interested in these types of activities. Yes, so thank you very much for your presentation. Let's move on to the second presentation by Wolfram Hoffenstedt from the Willy Brandt Foundation.
Yeah. Okay, let's
and
try
the title
there
is
it
The
is.
Public
Yes.
History and the Use of
Ich glaube,
Archival
jetzt müsste es
Material.
gehen. Ach Gott sei. Yeah, okay.
So
I think you
please
can see
limit
it.
your presentation to 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, I will try. Thank you very much indeed. I'm so glad to be here today, talking to you from Berlin. I'm the director of the Willy Brandt Foundation. It's a federal foundation erected by the German parliament, by the Bundestag. So we are non-for-profit and we are non-partisan, because Willy Brandt stands beyond the political parties today. And Oh, okay. You can see my presentation, yes? It works? Yes, I think.
Yes, it
Okay.
works.
Well, but let me start to express some gratitude. Gratitude toward Meung Hwa No, who brought us together today. But for so many times, since more than 10 years now, several times we had conferences on Willy Brandt, Ostpolitik, sunshine politics, and this was in May 2009, even with President Kim Dae-jung, who was there and delivered a speech, and he brought us together, and so we had so fine results of this. And I looked into my own digital archives and see today here we have Wieland Wagner, Bernd Schäfer. I hope we haven't changed that much. This was in May 2009 in Seoul, Hankuk University. And it was so important, and we are so grateful that Meung Hwa No took us to the demilitarized zone back then. It was such an interesting experience for us, and of course it reminded us of our own history. Germany is united today. There's no Berlin Wall anymore. And so, yes, it brought some strong memories. And of course, we have seen it today, Checkpoint Charlie. And it reminds us of the fact that several times in Cold War in Germany and Central Europe, we were close to a hot war. Also here, the confrontation between the American and Russian tanks in early 60s. Well, I'm going to talk, my topic is Willy Brandt and the Berlin Wall, how we transfer this and bring it in our exhibition. Obviously, Willy Brandt, there's a close link towards the Berlin Wall. He was, many forget, the governing mayor of West Berlin, of the free part of the city from 57 through 66, and so he led the Berliners through all those crises, the Khrushchev ultimatum or the construction of the Berlin Wall. The major source for us is the Willy Brandt archive in Bonn. It's within the archives of social democracy of the Friedrich Ebertsson Foundation. And to give you an idea, we are talking about 400 shelf meters of files. All in a database, by the way, to do research on it. It's all in a database today. We're talking about letters, memos, diaries, newspaper clippings, cartoons also, tens of thousands of photographs, some film footage and audio material. Most of it we have to bring in from other archives, of course. But also three-dimensional objects, thinking about gifts to a statesman. You have an idea how many gifts a statesman receives in office, but also all kinds of personal belongings, yeah? His pens, his ties, his tie pins, whatever. One task is, of course, to do research. We are a team of historians, we do editions, we do historic conferences, but here we are talking about our exhibitions. We have two of them actually in Berlin. Here the headquarters, the Forum Willy Brandt Berlin. Right now it's closed. We're working on a new exhibition. And another one is in Lübeck. Lübeck is in northern Germany, where Willy Brandt was born in 1913. And here we see the Willy Brandt House, Lübeck, city of his birth. And now look at the kids there, the school children. See, the wall is gone. So we have to find ways to relate the history and to make history alive. And this is what it's all about. It's about, Axel Klausmeier said it this morning, it's about keeping history alive, making it relevant, commemoration of the victims also, paying a tribute to them. And you need all this also for reconciliation between also the Germans in part of it. So the major task is, just to give you an idea, a typical structure of a panel in such an exhibition is what I want to show you. There are major chapters, sub-chapters, there are the exhibits, all kinds of, we will talk about. You can listen to audio material, and of course you have screens, typical for an exhibition. So we present, make it summary, photographs, archival documents, three-dimensional objects, placards, posters, placards, caricatures play an important role, pamphlets, magazine covers. It's basically the material. Well, the multimedia offer is interesting, several languages. Also with RFID chips, you get a program according to your age, your special interests. Yeah, so this is also very modern. And even for the little children, we have programs. Yeah, so you see the cat, Billy the cat, telling the story of Willy Brandt even to very little children. Well, the most powerful medium in an exhibition still, these are photographs, to bring over emotions, to carry over emotions, transfer them. Willy Brandt, you see him addressing the Berliners in 1959, before the wall was erected. Imagine, his slogan was "Berlin remains free." And back then, still the East Berliners could join the West Berliners and listen to Willy Brandt. So powerful. Photographs. Willy Brandt, he was a symbol for the fight of liberty in the West. Here in New York, getting a ticker tape parade. Usually astronauts or victorious troops get this. Yeah, Willy Brandt was in New York. He got this ticker tape parade. So now we're seeing an example, an early example for a cartoon. This is Willy Brandt after his election in 57, young politician. He became a statesman. It was the making of a statesman in these Berlin years after returning from exile from Norway after the war to Berlin. And here we see the symbol of the German division, Brandenburg Gate, which was even closed before the wall was erected. Yeah, it was already closed by the Eastern authorities. Willy Brandt has this burden of politics in Berlin, of the division of the city. Yeah, this is an object you find in the Willy Brandt archive. It's a pin, of course, the Brandenburg Gate, symbolizing the German division, and also the slogan, the call towards the East, open this gate. Yeah, and in Germany, we had a committee, Indivisible Germany. It was a movement rather from conservatives and intellectuals, Not Willy Brandt, he was a social democrat, but well, he supported it like the American politicians wearing all these pins with the American flag, who would not dare do this. Yeah? It's a must. And so Willy Brandt supported, and here on his box where they collect money, open this gate. This was the slogan, open this gate, the Brandenburg Gate. But you have to tell the whole story, of course, the visitor to the exhibition. This is a poster of the movement, and they called for the Germany in its borders of 1937. But Willy Brandt was so realistic, he knew if we get a unification one day, we will get maximum the two Germanys, East GDR and West Germany together. This is what we have today. So this says Germany divided into three parts, never. So you have to explain. Also cartoons, it's nice, but you usually need a lot of explanations because it's so in such a contemporary context. And yeah, open up this gate. Remember in '87, a big event in Berlin, the slogan, President Reagan addressing the Germans and the Berliners, and Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, come to this gate, open this gate. So this has had a longer effect, this movement, open up this gate. When we talk about Willy Brandt and these pictures, you have to talk about the refugees. We have seen this refugee camp in Marienfelder, Berlin. Axel Klausmeier mentioned it. Yeah, Willy Brandt welcoming refugees from East Berlin. The war was still open. You remember tens of thousands per month came over, fled to West Berlin. Well, okay, so important day, the erection of the Berlin Wall began on August 13th, 1961, coming back to emotions. This is a picture of Willy Brandt and some West Berliners the very same day at the demarcation line, whatever, the border between East and West Berlin. You can tell how deeply shocked they are. Huh? So this is a way, pictures to carry emotions. Well, this reminds me also in archive of the situation between the two Koreas, propaganda. And this translates, don't be naughty, Mr. Brandt, we are good marksmen. This is a few days after the erection of the wall, and Willy Brandt had called up on the East German border guards, okay, if you need to shoot, okay, you have your orders, but you don't have to hit the refugees. Yeah? And this is the answer and reminds us a little bit of the demarcation zone between the Koreas, the propaganda. Okay, documents, yeah, all sorts of documents. Here is an example. Willy Brandt met the conservative chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, the founding chancellor of the West Germany, taking notes, confidential notes on the meeting, well, on Berlin, the situation there. So, but this is the key document. A few days after the erection of the war, Willy Brandt, who had met President Kennedy at the White House before as governing mayor of West Berlin, he was not the German president or the foreign minister, he appeals to Kennedy and calls for action. He says, you cannot accept this, you have to do something about it, you cannot accept this in Berlin, the wall. And then the famous letter back, he says, okay, Mr. Brandt, I understand your concerns, but no way we can start a nuclear war because of Berlin. We will protect the western part of the city, we'll guarantee access and everything, but you have to find your own ways to deal with the situation, how to cope with this and find new ways. And this is when they started in Berlin with this policy of small steps. Okay, so in 63 in June, Kennedy was in Berlin. Ich bin ein Berliner, I'm a Berliner. But also this is diplomatic history. Willy Brandt in the middle, according to protocol, the Chancellor Adenauer, this old man, should have sit next to the president. He didn't, because he didn't speak English. And Willy Brandt, from exile, he was fluent in 5 languages. So he didn't like it, you can tell. Huh? Staging things. Look at this. This is inside the exhibition. We cannot erect a wall there, but staging things means we have erected a steel grid panel and there's a photograph attached to it. Adenauer comes to Berlin in August 61. And you see again in the background the symbol of German division, the Brandenburg Gate. Newspaper covers, also good things for an exhibition of a politician. Here is the Stern magazine. We finally need someone to act. Yeah? Willy Brandt, the strong man. Interesting, back then, the conservative press, by the way, they were in support of Willy Brandt for a while, until he really started with his Ostpolitik, then they got more skeptical, but they needed someone to bring action. And yeah, and Willy Brandt moved things, you know it. The Ostpolitik started in a little scope in Berlin. There's no helplessness. This is a newspaper cover, the Berliner Zeitung. And so the first result of the Ostpolitik, the policy of small stops, was a passing permit agreement. So the West Berliners at least could see their East Berliners, the family members. And here, right on the button, you see such a passing permit. So of course you have to show this in the exhibition, and Willy Brandt has some of it in his archive. Telling history about Willy Brandt and the Berlin Wall is also about history with our relations to our allies. Yeah, you can show hundreds of pictures, Willy Brandt bringing his guests to the war. And this is Robert Kennedy, early 60s, back then, Minister of Justice. Nice picture also. This is in the mid-80s, Willy Brandt giving an interview on the situation in the second phase of this Cold War, last phase, and he was still confident. He was sure, yes, this wall stands against history, and he still believed in the long run it would fall. Well, 3-dimensional object. Every exhibition needs certain treasures. This is the gift of Kennedy, the president, to Mayor Willy Brandt. It's a gilded cigar box here in a display case, showcase, and there's still the crunches of Willy Brandt's cigars inside, and our restaurator makes sure that they remain there. So this is also part of it. Isn't it a wonderful cartoon? I talked about cartoons. Willy Brandt starts this new Ostpolitik, yeah? And there were positive results, and so he opened up these walls, and there is a sun, reminds us of his influence on the sunshine policies later in Korea. This is a wonderful cartoon representing this. Yeah, I like it. And well, we are coming close to 89. The wall fell, and Willy Brandt hurried to Berlin from Bonn. from our old West German capital. He had to fly via Hamburg because there were no Lufthansa flights back then possible to Berlin. And he took notes. What I'm going to say to the Berliners tonight. He knew it would be a big day for him. And so, yeah. And so then he uttered his famous words, which became the slogan of the German unification process, inner German also reunification process. Now what belongs together will grow together. And this is what he took note on. You've seen it, his manuscript, his notes he took. And here is an example of a poster. The Social Democratic Party of Germany was smart enough to use this. This is a huge poster of SPD quoting him. Now grows together, Willy Brandt, and yeah, wonderful picture, Willy Brandt. He was the hero, of course, of the day on November 9th and 10th in 89. Well, I'm finished almost, but of course, we are not the war memorial, and so we have no panel or no wall, and we speak about it, but we were really glad that the city of Berlin gave us a gift. And this is a panel of the Berlin Wall. It was transported to the Willy Brandt house in Lübeck, 300 kilometers in the north of Berlin. And yeah, of course, and so at least, I mean, in Berlin, you can go to the wall for memorial, but here at least now we can show the kids and say, here, look at this. And also another project, at least it had nothing to do with the archive, but we had little dioramas, 7 display cases telling the whole story from 1945 to the fall of the wall. Wonderful in 1:87 scales. This is a scale they use for model trains, you know. And this is wonderful to work with young people and show them how a street in Berlin developed and how things came up. This is a wonderful project. And look at it. Even the makers made Willy Brandt in his interview. You've seen him. Is sitting there. So you've seen the pictures. Well, I guess 50 minutes should have made it. Thank you very much.
Okay. 네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. Wolfram Hoppenstedt, thank you for your presentation. We heard from the German speaker. We talked about the documents, records, diorama, the cigarette case. He talked about the reality of Germany, and I think it was meaningful in that we from Korea can learn from the German case. Thank you for your presentation. Next, we're going to hear from our third speaker, Professor Roh Myung-hwan, Department of History, Information, and Archival Science of Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. He's going to talk about Kim Dae-jung's peace thought and policy for sublimation, the tragedy in DMZ and Nogunri for its documentation. I'd like to give the microphone to Professor Roh Myung-hwan. 15 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim Hong-guk. Korea was divided into the North and the South with the beginning of the Cold War. After the Second World War, at the same time, with the liberation from the colonial yoke by Japan, the Koreans suffered from the Korean War, 1950-53. After that war, emerged the DMZ, demilitarized zone. So the Korean DMZ stood for the national division, dispersed family, war and the constant confrontation. We see here the iron fence as the symbol for that. However, it must be the symbol for the needs for past repentance and redressing, and of forgiving, reconciliation, freedom, peace, coexistence, harmony, global democracy. As we see here, it seems that the present ecology of the DMZ represent those values. Hereby, let's see a political figure, Kim Dae-jung, to illustrate the destiny of Korean contemporary history with his thought and life, and to understand them in comparison and relations to German contemporary history. Kim Dae-jung decided to contribute himself for the politics to achieve democracy, the peaceful unification Koreas, and the common prosperity. He became the candidate of the opposite party for the national presidency in 1970, but without success in national election. He was kidnapped by the KCIA, Korean Central Information Agency, in Japan in August 8th and 13th, 1973. At the time, he fought for freedom, democracy, and the unification of Korea in exile to Japan. He continued to suffer from house arrest, imprisonment, death threat, and death penalty. Exiles. He became the president of the Republic of Korea, January 1998. As we see here, prison letters of Kim Dae-jung to his wife and children, where he wrote his worldviews, are very amazing from the perspective of visual form, the numerous letters in the small writing pad, and the deep contents. He learned with the readings very, very hard in the prison. He called the prison his college. For such Kim Dae-jung, Berlin Wall was very important symbol. He got many kinds of ideas and stimulus from the West German political, economic, and social system. Above all, East-West German relations. Berlin Wall and the German DMZ approached to him very meaningfully in comparison and analogy to Korean DMZ. Divided Berlin Wall and its mayor, and later the Chancellor Willy Brandt, were the sources for the thinking in terms of the Korean divided situation and the way to peaceful unity. He loved to visit Berlin Wall. He used Berlin as the symbolical site for his policy on North-South Korean relations. For example, he made Berlin Declaration as proposals toward North Korea for exchange and cooperation in March 9th, 2000. In connection with the Berlin Wall, Kim Dae-jung came to observe a figure in Berlin. He was mayor of Berlin, the later Federal Chancellor Willy Brandt. Willy Brandt became a role model for Kim Dae-jung. Kim Dae-jung developed the sunshine policy to the model of post-politic of Willy Brandt. We saw a caricature explained by Wolfram Hoppenstedt just before. Okay, sunshine policy in Ostpolitik. Good. To pursue the sunshine policy, Kim Dae-jung took the strengths of the South Korea and the alliance with Western countries, above all with the USA, for significant. As like Willy Brandt's position in relation to Ostpolitik. Willy Brandt had fought for the freedom and democracy, solidarity as unity in diversity in exile to Norway against Nazi regime. As the federal chancellor, he apologized for the crimes, especially war crimes of the German people in the time of Nazi regime, with genuflection, reeling down here. He realized the first summit meeting between the West and the East of March 1970. He got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1971. This Willy Brandt engaged himself always very actively in saving life and freedom of Kim Dae-jung. To save Kim from the death penalty, he wrote the below letter to Chun Do-hwan, November 4th, 1980, the President of the Republic of Korea, who came to power through military coup d'etat. This letter I could find out in Willy Brandt archive. Thank you very much, Wolfram Hoppenstedt. Okay. The first face-to-face meeting between two figures came into being October 26, 1989 in Seoul. At that time, they said that they met long ago already and were very familiar with each other. The first summit meeting between the South and the North occurred in June 2000. Kim Dae-jung got the Nobel Peace Prize in the same year as like Willy Brandt did previous in 1971. As far as so far, we see some systematic similarities and parallels under the difference and the close connections between the two figures with the backgrounds of Berlin Wall and the Korean DMZ. Now we see a little bit about the Korean peculiarities due to the Korean Civil War, which did not happen in Germany. Among them, let's think something about the representations and the symbols of Nogunri incident, the massacre, which Mr. Jung Woo-do explained in detail. Hereby, I would like to talk some more in relation to Kim Dae-jung. With the beginning of the Kim Dae-jung government, 1998, the issue of Nogunri incident was emerging. September 30th, 1999, the AP USA news platform treated that issue systematically in detail, as Jung Woo-do already explained. On the next day, the President of USA, Bill Clinton, ordered to investigate the matter officially, and another next day, Kim Dae-jung did that also. After Clinton received the result of an investigation and confirmed the massacre of Korean civilians by US force in Nogunri, expressed deep regret and announced plan for the consolation and measures for the bereaved family in January 2001, as Dr. Jung Woo-do described in detail. Then he called the President of Republic of Korea, Kim Dae-jung, and delivered the same information. The President Kim Dae-jung expressed his appreciation for President Clinton's resolving the problems within the president's tenure. He expressed that the Republic of Korea and the US alliance has been further strengthened by working together to resolve the issues of the past. However, the Nogunri Victim Countermeasure Committee pointed out that President Clinton's speech was not apology, but was regret, and thus refused to accept consolation and compensation for their pains and damages. Yes, as Jong-do pointed out already, it was already very valuable thing that Clinton expressed regret. Usually, we cannot expect that US president express regret in that kind of form. The Victims Countermeasures Committee was disappointed very deeply just because the President Kim Dae-jung, who fought for democracy and human rights and has risen to the top of national leadership on that basis, was not active for that critical matter. That indicated the very pity, regrettable, and tragic situation of the divided country. As a national president, Kim Dae-jung pursued the Sunshine Policy with the support of Bill Clinton's government, and at the same time, he had to solve the problem of IMF's situation with the support from the world, with the USA support. To Kim Dae-jung, such pity, regrettable, and tragic situation had to be solved through the ways of division or overcoming. Meanwhile, Nogunri Victim Countermeasures Committee realized the sacrifice of the US soldier in Nogunri area for the military defense operation and eventually their values in terms of keeping the freedom of the Republic of Korea. Nogunri Victims Countermeasures Committee has been trying for the establishment of the memorial for the US soldiers offered in Nogunri area. All were the sacrifice of the war. Already Dr. Jong-do emphasized this aspect. Thought and civil movement activities for the anti-war and peace were strongly motivated through that. The needs for the memorial for the offered soldiers in Nogunri area are stressed by them officially and pursued. The Nogunri massacre meant and stood for human pains, war crime, tragedy, and lifelong trauma. However, at the same time, it symbolized the need for past repentance and redressing and of forgiving, reconciliation, peace, coexistence, anti-war and peace movement. In Korea, there have been continuous challenges between the way to reconciliation and peace coexistence, the need for endurance and persistent endeavors for the overcoming these challenges. For example, by George W. Bush government of the USA, was the Sunshine Policy criticized. In contrast to the Clinton government, which supported Kim Dae-jung actively, he had to keep overcoming these challenges. Then let's see here the world view. of Kim Dae-jung. To him, the world consisted of the various, even contradictory, antagonistic, and confrontational elements with each other. In this sense, he regarded the democracy as the most important principle and system for the society. His democracy concept was based on the mutual recognition, respect, creative interaction among the society members to the principle of unity in diversity. Kim Dae-jung's idea of forgiveness and peace to the principle of unity in diversity in the letter to his third son, Hongul, from army prison, says, I have come to the conclusion that the conflicting elements I have noted above could and indeed should be integrated to constitute a universal truth. The process of this integration cannot, however, be just a simple synthesis. Instead, the theory of essence should resolve its inner contradictions through a creative approach to evolution and progress. What I meant to say is that the necessary unifying process cannot be static and mechanical. It should be dialectical, fostering harmonious, integrative development among all manner of contradictions and confrontations. Kim Dae-jung's understanding on the theory of yin and yang says, I don't know enough to talk about the book on change of Jew country. However, all things are made up of yin and yang, and there is not yin and yang separated. Yang in yin, yin in yang, okay? And the interactions are in change. Okay, constant interactions between different elements and interaction, creation, new ones are in constant changes. Originally, Korean national flag stands for that. Okay, I want to emphasize this kind of way of thinking. Korea is divided, and there are many confrontations, enmity, and about which we talk today. We can understand that those are essential phenomena of our world. So we can try to have intercultural communication. The DMZ can stand for such kind of intercultural communication. So different things is not dangerous, are not dangerous. Different things can be source for interactions and creating new ones. So in that sense, we can treat the situation of division, and we can develop our policies toward them. So his idea, how can one produce such kind of interaction and creation of new one through approaches, mutual approaches, interactions. That was Kumgang Mountain travel and Kaesong Industrial Complex project. And he meant Iron Silk Road. Nowadays, we discuss undersea tunnel between Japan and Korea. Then from Japan to cross Great Britain, Trans-Asian Railway Network is Iron Silk Road and the Digital Silk Road. In the age of information and knowledge, we can realize such kind of idea, so harmony between confrontational elements. That idea led to Kim Dae-jung about global democracy, harmony not only between man and man, rather between man and nature, and between nature and nature, global democracy. Such kind of idea we can adopt for pursuing in preserving and using the asset of DMZ. And in that sense, I personally want to try Kim Seung-ho's work and Hwang Ho-seok's work in the sense of global democracy. And as noted by Professor Mikhail Fu, the Korea Pop can work to realize such kind of ideas, harmony between confrontational elements. Okay, here I want to again stress the relation between Korea and Germany, the common experience of division. Now we confront the weather changes and corona problem, all things. We are in crisis. We can solve those kind of problems according to this kind of ideas and philosophy and our will to bring into practice. Thank you very much.
네, 노명훈 교수님 수고 많으셨습니다.
Thank you, Professor Myung-hwan No, for your presentation. You spent 25 minutes, and Mr. Chung Gu-do spent 25 minutes, and Mr. Hoppenstedt went for 15 minutes. So we're slightly behind schedule. And Mr. Professor Manfred Heinemann, who was going to deliver the closing remarks, he won't be able to do that. So I'd like to ask for your understanding. And he delivered his wish for the success of the conference. Now we are short on time. So we have 4 panel members. I'm going to give 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes for each panel member for their discussion. I know that there are questions from part 1 that have to be answered as well. So let's go ahead with the panel discussion first. I'm going to give each panel member 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll be able to cover questions from part 1. There were 3 very meaningful and significant presentations. Thank you so much. Now we have 4 panel members who will provide discussions. First of all, we have Professor Sandip Mishra from Jawaharlal Nehru University. So Professor Mishra is very well knowledge about Korea and sunshine policy of President Kim Dae-jung, and he's very well informed. So I'm going to ask Professor Mishra for 5 to 6 minutes of discussion.
미샤 교수님 나오 계시나요?
Professor,
네,
are you there?
네,
Yes.
반갑습니다. 토론 부탁드립니다.
Nice to meet you. Please go ahead.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
First, I would like to thank Professor Noomyang Hwan for inviting me to this conference and all the organizing institutions who have put this conference to a reality. It's a very important discussion which we had on memories and documentation. And in the first and second session, we had multiple presentations, and frankly speaking, I learned a lot. My connection to this issue is because I study about inter-Korea relations, and I have been doing it for last 2 decades. I had chance to meet President Kim Dae-jung at least 8-9 times. One time, actually, when I was doing my PhD, I had chance to discuss with him inter-Korea relations for more than 2 hours. And that made me interested in his sunshine policy. I wrote papers on sunshine policy. And basically, I came across, I tried to learn more about how 2 divided countries, they deal with each other and problems of their identity, their memory, their history. And that led to I will not take a long time, and I will come to my discussion part. I basically learned a lot from Chairman Chongkudo. He's from Nogunri International Peace Foundation. He's chairman. And he has spent almost his whole life to preserve the memory of Nogunri and related incidents. And I really appreciate, I really respect him because of his really hard work. I do agree with him that preservation of historical memories are important. There must be documentation. There must be also maybe, if in case somehow oral traditions could also be maintained, that's going to be very important. And more than anything, I was really impressed by his International Peace Foundation, where they have been trying to understand the whole phenomena from a victim-centric perspective. I feel that learning about our history and historical memory, reminding about those historical memories are very important, both for self and also for others. I'm talking about victims like Pieja and Khareja. So both of them, they should learn and they should keep themselves remind, because reconciliation and peace is not going to happen if you keep denying historical pain, historical sufferings, and injustices. It will only happen when you admit, you recognize that these things happen. Because as our great leader Mahatma Gandhi told once, that truth is the only thing which emancipates us, which makes us free. If you try to hide something, if you try not to talk about something, that's not going to help our society in long term. So I'm really appreciative. If I remember, I had an interview of President Kim Dae-jung. I talked to him and he was talking about inter-Korea relations. And he told me that, look, there are 2 types of, broadly there are 2 types of memories, pleasant memories and some painful memories. What happens that we basically try to evoke pleasant memories and try to suppress our unpleasant, painful memories. But he said that, look, you need to definitely evoke your image, your pleasant memories, but at the same time, you also need to preserve your painful memories. It's very important because that basically helps us to understand where we were in the past and where we have come now and how we are going to move forward. So he said that for a futuristic plan to make a world free from pain, suffering, and injustice, we need to articulate our memory, document them, preserve them. And I think that's what all of us actually, from early morning, let's say from today, session 1 and session 2, I learned a lot from presentation of Wang Ho Sal, Kim Song Ho, Kim Young Chu, Yi Chang Soo, Cho Hing Nim, Wagner, Mr. Wagner, Chongku Do in my session, Wolfram Hofstede, and Professor No Myung Hwan. So I really learned a lot, and I feel that this memory documentation and having a perspective, I think Willy Brandt Foundation, Nogunri International Peace Foundation, and all these organizations which are part of it, basically they understand this nuanced issue that memory, not for just keeping self-inflicting pain on us, but basically to become a better society, a better people, having reconciliation, peace, and having futuristic vision. That's very important. And I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
네, 미슈라 교수님 너무 감사합니다.
Thank you, Professor Mishra. Thank you for your comment and also the story of Mahatma Gandhi, that we need to confront the memories of the past. Thank you. I hope you are healthy and are full of good luck. Next, we're going to hear from Professor Wolfgang Giller of the University of Applied Science and Arts, Dortmund. We're going to hear from the German perspective. Professor Wolfgang Giller, are you here with us?
Thank you, 감사합니다. First of all, thank you very, very much for the invitation. I believe it's really a groundbreaking conference which you organized today, and in particular, the international composition of the presentations has to be emphasized, and it should be continued. Most probably it should be also published. Just going around my head, that's really impressive. Being a cultural anthropologist, I would just like to add, also due to the limited time, only a few cultural anthropological thoughts to these really excellent and profitable lectures we shared today concerning peace and coexistence. We all, as human beings, think have to regard that we do not only have to open our minds, but also we have to open our hearts. And I believe that is very important to have something as a coming up to have something as a common way of everyday living, because there's nothing like a historical past being alike. There's nothing like a historical past which is the same. For example, with regard to the Berlin Wall, the shock of the dividing Berlin through this building of a wall, 1961, the student revolt in 1968, the World Health Youth Festival in 1973, and many other events. They shaped a specific socio-historical structure of life and of memory, especially in Berlin then, which is unique. In November 1989, the wall fell because of East German citizens forced it peacefully. For decades, the situation in Berlin has not only been out of national, but also out of international interests. But how do historical events such as those like the Berlin Wall or the DMZ shape us in our memories, shape us in our forgettings? What actually is forgetting? Is it something like a raw material of human experience? Is it a pure memory, especially out of a cultural anthropological point of view? This understanding of something unique, of something pure in a memory, has to be denied. Everything is always embedded in a narrative context, in a single story that takes meaning to what happened. You don't see the thing itself, but only your own view on it. This applies to cultural anthropological research, the description of other people, of other culture. And here again, objective observation of foreign customs is an illusion, because other people's fictions change their meaning as soon as we become aware that each of us lives in fictions. They are shaped aloud both individually and collectively, primarily through forgetting. But what forms of forgetting are there? On the one hand, reference can be made in the context to the return. Our return is to find a lost past. By forgetting the present and the immediate past, and a continuity to the older past is established. This, we may call it search of the lost time, is always the search for the former self. The second form could be characterized as a state of limbo, a moment of radical presence in which both the past and the future are suspended for a moment, just like in a flow or like in love. And there is a new beginning. It concerns is to find the future again by forgetting the past. The forms are connected by a selective use of time. This also serves to give shape and meaning to existence. How can we go back to childhood without turning away from the present? How to surrender without distance to everything when everything is saved? How can we draw a line and start again? Forgetting extends life to include what has been, and at the same time to enjoy the present. But above all, it offers the possibility of a new beginning, whether as a word of consent or forgiveness. Forgiveness to all the victims and human sufferings caused by the Berlin Wall or by the DMZ. Let me wrap this short ideas just with a word from a French anthropologist up. who's from Marc Auger. He once mentioned that we have to forget in order to remain present. I wish that we will be able to continue this communication, and it's so in need, especially for shaping a peaceful world. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
네, 볼프강 길러 교수님 감사합니다.
Professor Giller, thank you very much. You addressed the topic of forgetting and remembrance in connection to DMZ and the Berlin Wall. Thank you very much for your comments. I'm going to now invite Professor Yoon Yong-sung from Hansung University. We are running short on time, so please limit your comments to 5 to 6 minutes. Yes, I will. As introduced, I am Yoon Yong-sung from Hansung University. First of all, I'd like to comment on Mr. Chung's presentation. So this presentation was about the division between the victims and those who inflicted pain on these victims. So the Nogunri massacre was a tragic incident caused internally. In the beginning of the Korean War in July 1950 in Nogunri in Chungbuk province, it was committed by US troops who were our ally, not our enemy, who killed the civilians. And in Kochang, the Korean troops massacred the civilians in those villages. The states have the obligation of protecting their own citizens, but these massacres occurred. So the governments may not have, it may not have been easy for them to recognize their fault. And of course, governments were extremely shying away from admitting their wrongdoings. And in this situation, fact-finding activities of Nogunri and compensation for the victims were not done properly or not done quickly enough. So Chairman Chung's presentation gave a detailed account of what has happened. And according to Chairman Chung's presentation, the Nogunri International Peace Foundation was established for fact-finding of the Nogunri massacre, but now the foundation has expanded its activities to be engaged in movements against war and violent conflict. And he mentioned about the erecting of a memorial for the US troops that have fallen during the Korean War. That was quite impressive because there were many young American soldiers who were sacrificed, or even though they survived, they had to suffer from the war trauma. So these are also victims of the Korean War. So the recognition of US soldiers as victims of the Korean War was quite important because the massacre in Nogunri would be actually the fault of the war itself, not by any individual stakeholders. Of course, in order to reach to this point, there had to be a lot of work. A lot of work had to be done before that for compensation of the victims and the recognizing of the wrongdoings. So the Nogunri massacre would have implications for civilian massacres that were committed in Vietnam. So I'd like to ask Mr. Chung, Chairman Chung, about your perspective on this type of interpretation. And moving on to presentations by Mr. Hoppenstedt and Professor No Myung-wan. The two presenters discussed the role of documentation and collections on Willy Brandt and President Kim Dae-jung. Politicians and statements, so they belong to a political party, and political parties are judged through elections. So in terms of political process, these political parties will think and act in the political way. Therefore, it is not easy for individual politicians to pursue their ambitions or their ideals through the political process. However, Willy Brandt or President Kim Dae-jung did not care. Well, they wanted to pursue their dreams and ideals in their own processes, and Willy Brandt implemented the East policy, and he made huge contributions to the German unification and the end of the Cold War. And President Kim Dae-jung visited North Korea, and finally, his such action brought a new phase in the inter-Korean relations. So both in Europe and on the Korean Peninsula, Willy Brandt and Kim Dae-jung made huge contribution as they were trying to put an end to the Cold War, and their achievements were recognized with Nobel Peace Prize award. And there is another commonality between the two leaders, which was democracy. They had strong conviction in democracy because Willy Brandt had the experience of the Nazi oppression, and Kim Dae-jung had the experience of the military dictatorship. In 1980, there was a suicide. There was a death penalty imposed upon Kim Dae-jung, but Willy Brandt went out there to save his life because they shared the conviction in democracy, and their relationship became closer as they shared common value. They had strong belief in peace and democracy, and as a result, their political moves were rather aligned, and there are a lot of similarities between these two leaders, and that's why these two leaders are well respected in their own countries. So remembering these politicians, remembering these leaders, and raising awareness on their values and their beliefs by these foundations, this is very critical. So thank you very much for your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yoon. You talked about the interpretation of Nogunri and the significance of that case. And also thank you for making your panel short. Next, we're going to hear from Professor Bernd Schaeffer from the Woodrow Wilson Center of the US. Once again, 5 to 6 minutes. I'd like to ask for your understanding. And
thank you very much.
The microphone is given to Professor Schaeffer.
Microphone is on. I hope you can hear me. Well, thank you so much. It was a fascinating conference. I think I'm the last speaker, so I'm between you and the end of the conference, so I try to stay within my 6 minutes. Professor Myung-han, who organized this wonderful event, asked me to specifically talk about US approaches, US policy, actually also US administrations. So my talk will be brief, but it will be a bit more political, but I also try to be a bit more practical, particularly since we had this excellent panel where we had Mr. Chung Koo-do talking about Nogunri, which obviously is an American issue. And it was a fascinating talk. I had the chance to see his paper before the presentation. I went through all of it. It has a lot of fascinating details. It's very impressive, actually, what he has achieved. So let me just address a few issues here. Obviously, if Korea in the last decades is a major issue in the United States, it's related to North Korea, and it's related to nuclear tests, it's related to missiles. We had those issues twice, right after a new American president came to power. 2009 was Obama, in 2017 was Trump. So far, we did not have it with Biden, and I hope it stays this way, because then we can focus on other issues. And those other issues I want to briefly address are basically the relations between the US and South Korea. Because I think we see an interesting pattern if you look at the last decades, that usually there's not much going on with regard to US-Korean relations, as well as to inter-Korean relations and dialogue between the Koreas, if you have the constellation of either a conservative government in power in Seoul or a Republican government in charge in the US, sometimes both. And in many cases, you basically have a blockade. Almost the entire Obama administration was facing the conservative governments of Lee Myung-bak and then President Park. There was not much movement. Kim Dae-jung had the unfortunate situation that for the end of his term, he had the George W. Bush administration, which was very different from the Clinton administration. So this time, currently, there's a liberal government in Seoul. There is now a democratic administration in Washington. And for the first time, I think the last 20 decades, we have this constellation. And I think this opens a certain chance for both sides. As you know, of course, presidential elections in the US and South Korea are not parallel. It usually happens that in the midst of American administration or Korean administration, you have a presidential election in the other country, and then relations change again. But now you still have about 2 years of President Moon, you have about 4 years of President Biden, and there's a certain chance maybe to get certain things moving. There is one major issue, I think, which can be addressed by the South Korean government, and as I understand, I haven't really followed it in detail, I have to say, but what I notice is that the Moon government during the talks in the last couple of years with North Korea under the Trump administration, and now again is floating the idea of a peace agreement of the Korean War. As you of course know, in 1953, there was no peace agreement signed. The war ended with an armistice only. And there is still sort of official peace treaty lacking. This was floated in the last couple of years as maybe a way to get some kind of inter-Korean dialogue and reconciliation started, also using it sort of as a vehicle to deal with the nuclear issue. Of course, the entire nuclear issue, which for the US means denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, is an extremely sticky point if it gets tied together with the peace treaty. But the peace treaty issue, I think, is a venue which hopefully the South Korean government tries to exploit to the maximum now in the next 2 years and try to float this idea with the US in a comprehensive way. This can lead to a lot of changes in many regards. It would also help with a lot of the projects actually we talked about today. You can link almost all the memorial projects. You can link certain reconciliation projects with this major concept of the official peace agreement of the Korean War. You can also link particularly the Nogunri issue with that. The case of the Nogunri massacre, I think, is a highly interesting one, and my recommendation would be to the Korean side, not try to internationalize it, like saying, yeah, there were many Nogunris in the world committed by the Americans, which is true. I mean, certainly you have similar cases in Vietnam. You have a lot of additional cases now in Iraq and Afghanistan. But if you try to do that, you won't get very far with the US public, not to speak with any US political entity. But if you try to use this case sort of as a special case where you have, and this is true in that regard here, where you have Americans at the same time being perpetrators and victims. You have the same Americans who committed massacres against Koreans are later dying fighting for Koreans in the Korean War. And this is a constellation which is unique, which then sort of allows, and the foundation apparently is doing this, and Mr. Chung is absolutely aware of that. If you push it in this direction, I think maybe you can achieve something in the American public where you can get a certain acceptance for reconciliation issues and issues of past war injustices in Korea. Of course, it's always hard to say anything to the American public, which will be highly polarized and divided. But I think at least this case offers a certain opening. I'm not sure to what extent they have become active in this regard, but now for the first time, I think in history, we have in the US also 2 Korean Americans in Congress who have been elected, one a Republican woman from California and a Democrat in New Jersey. I'm not sure to what extent those people who was named Kim are open to your projects and your approach, but it can also certainly help to create a certain awareness. But overall, I think the major political situation, the overall political situation will be decisive. It depends on what's going to happen with regard to North Korea. If there is no major dramatic event over the next couple of months or maybe even 2 years, I would at least see an opening for the South Korean government under President Moon to maybe push the US government towards an approach to have a comprehensive settlement with regard to this 1950 lacking peace treaty of the Korean War, which then might, if the US somehow might be coming on board, might offer a lot of additional opportunities and would give a major boost basically to all kinds of projects with regard to inter-Korean relations and, if you may, even inter-Korean unification. Thank you so much.
네, 셰프 연구님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. You spent 8 minutes. Thank you. He discussed how we can approach all these past events in a wise manner, and he shared his perspective as someone in the US, and he also discussed how we should and we can remember all these past events and while getting the support of the current American public. So thank you very much for your comments. I believe that our discussions were very meaningful and informative. We do have some time limit, so I will hand it over to Professor No so that he will lead the roundtable discussion where Chairman Chung would also have to answer. And so I'm going to hand it over to Professor No for his moderation. Yes, but I'd like to give a chance to Chairman Chung because there was also a question about the case in Vietnam. So yes. Professor Yoon Young-sun, thank you very much for your comments and your question. During the Vietnamese War, Korean soldiers were dispatched, and there were several incidents where civilians were killed, and there were some actual records that demonstrated that. Now, about the Nogunri massacre and the fact-finding and the compensation, President Kim Dae-jung demanded such compensation and fact-finding, and the victims of Nogunri massacre have been demanding for compensation and recognition of the wrongdoings. And so we have been making such demands for many decades, both to the Korean government and to the US government. And in order for us to gain justification for such demands for the US government's apology and the compensation, in order for us to gain such justification, then I would say that the Korean government also has to do fact-finding investigation for the wrongdoings during the Vietnam War. And if there were any victims, then they would have to be compensated as well. And I believe this is a legal obligation as well. So once again, we had the Nogunri massacre in Korea. And there's a Korean saying that after the difficult times, you would become more strong, you will become stronger. So I think this is a lesson that we need to remember. Mr. Shepard talked about our perspective on the Nogunri incident. When Korean soldiers were sent to Vietnam, there were some wrongdoings. So we would have to recognize them and address them in the same way as the Nogunri incident should be addressed and responded to. So there should be the same approach. So as Dr. Sheffer from Woodrow Wilson Center, thank you for your advice and a practical advice. And we should expand our academic research. And at the same time, we should engage in this type of dialogue with the US side. Thank you.
네, 노무현 교수님,
Thank
혹시
you.
다른
Professor No, before we have anybody burning to make their last comments, I'd like to provide the microphone to Professor No. Anybody?
답변이 충분히 된 거예요?
Do you think he made the answer adequately? Yes. Thank you, Chairman Chung, for your contribution. We have learned a lot thanks to the Nogunri Foundation's presentation. I know we are running out of time, but I can see the person Kim Naman. Could we provide the microphone to him so that I have a quick question, but because of the time constraint, I'm a little hesitant. But if it's okay, could I make a question? Yes, make the question brief. Thank you for your presentations. I study history as well as archival information. I studied Mongol studies when I was an undergraduate, and what I studied then was on war and archives and records. I heard that a lot of people went to Mongolia during the Korean War. I wanted to write a thesis on that, but I couldn't. But anyways, I want to ask my questions on war of orphans. What type of historical research is being made in terms of war orphans? Is there any examples that you can share with us, or if you could? I'm not sure if we have enough time to answer that question, but my question is regarding war orphans. Professor No, could you answer that? Well, I think Kim Naun's question could be answered in the next symposium because I don't think have time for that right now. So let's continue to talk on that subject in the future. Would that be okay? Thank you.
Now it is time to wrap up, but as Chairman Chung-Gudo mentioned, and Klaus Meyer
If you allow me to, I would
from
like to
Berlin
say
Wall
something.
Foundation.
Well, I think we have had a fantastic few hours together, and the interchange between both, well, on Korea on the one hand, and the focus also a little bit on Berlin. Perhaps this is only my perspective, but putting it into an international context, the Cold War history opened, I think, and that is what we've heard most recently, many eyes. We got a deeper insight in background stories as of this very terrible massacre. And I strongly, I understood very much better, again, how much civic commitment was involved in getting more light into this. So I think you all there did a great job, and I'm very appreciative of this to learn about this and that you share your incredible knowledge with us. I think from my point of view, this can only, and this was a wonderful start, Professor No, for perhaps a sequence of events, of debates, perhaps sometimes in a smaller surrounding, sometimes bigger, and I believe there is a lot to share still. We know that research has to be continued on very many issues here in my country, but also in yours, since your the story of your division is still so pendant, so actual and present in all what you're doing. So I consider it to be only a first step, but extremely vital. And therefore, thank you very much. And I look forward to our mutual cooperation, and I look forward to seeing you all in, well, perhaps under this umbrella, so to speak, and under these circumstances, but also hopefully alive and at very good health in a next meeting, may it be in Seoul, may it be in Berlin, in Washington, or in Delhi. You never know. So hopefully we will meet each other together pretty soon. Thank you so much for all your contributions and the energy that went into your great talks.
May I say something? Oh, whoever. Okay. If you allow me to, I can only underline what Axel Klausmeier said. Thank you so much on behalf of all participants of this conference. It was really interesting, and I hope we can continue it. If you allow me to, may I extend an invitation? In 2 years, in 2023, we plan to go to Korea, South Korea, with our international Willy Brandt exhibition in Korean language, of course, specialized on sunshine policy, East policy, relations between Willy Brandt and Kim Il-jung and everything. So we plan to start at the German embassy, and we will go, of course, to Hankuk University. But maybe you have an idea where there are so many institutions here represented. Maybe we find places out of Seoul. And so if you have ideas, please contact me or contact me via Professor No. And well, we are open to this, and we would organize this and bring this to your institutions. I think Willy Brandt and Kim Il-jung is a fantastic chapter. Bridge between our countries. Thank you so much.
예, 감사합니다. 모든
Thank you very much, everyone.
저희가 이것을 이렇게 이제 많은 분들이 참여해서 이렇게 하다 보니까
We have a lot of participants, so I know that we wish that we could continue on with the discussion, but unfortunately we are not able to. So what I'm thinking is to create smaller groups. So with a smaller number of participants, depending on our interests, depending on our research areas, we can have small group discussions. And then by connecting these small groups, we can also have a large event in the future as well. I thought about the idea of unity in diversity. We need diversity and we need unity at the same time. So these are feeding into each other. And that is exactly actually what Willy Brandt proposed, and President Kim Dae-jung pursued unity in diversity. And President Kim Dae-jung's idea expanded to Yin Yang Yang as well. So we are diverse, but we're also united. So in the future, I think we can design some small group discussions on certain subject areas, and then we will connect them together. And then we can develop further networking. So I have a lot of ideas that are boiling right now. So this was a wonderful gathering. And if we had not had this experience, I would not have known what to do next. So this was a great opportunity. And the presenters were not able to provide additional comments due to the time limit. So I'd like to ask for your understanding. I'm sorry about this, but we will have future occasions to share our ideas as well. The topic that we discussed in today's conference was about promoting global peace and coexistence by overcoming the wars and divisions. And we need to create new values and we need to create a better world. And in order to pursue these goals, we can learn lessons from the Berlin Wall, the division in Germany, the German unification, the Korean Peninsula, the DMZ. We are now living in the reality of the division, and then we have many tragedies in the past. These tragedies are not just between enemies, but also even within the same society, we may have some tragic incidents such as the Nogunri incident. And in these circumstances, what is important is that we have to deal with and live with differences and diverse opinions. And with these differences and diversities, we can create something new. And that is what I mean by progress. So Willy Brandt and Kim Dae-jung, I am interested in these political figures because these two leaders were very fierce in pursuing these ideals with their East policy and Sunshine policy. And such ideals are not just limited to them, but as Wagner mentioned, the Berlin Wall or the DMZ, these painful pasts, we need to get closer to them and share them. But at the same time, we should be careful not to beautify them or not to make or cover them. But we have to really see through all these painful past events. We should admit them and recognize them as they are rather than trying to wrap them up in a nice paper. So this is something that we need to reflect on as well. So given these aspects, I believe that it's not just a matter of choice or choosing which perspective to take, but we have to be able to look at all the different perspectives and their relations. We don't have any object that we will observe in a scientific manner, but these require interpretations and multiple perspectives. So as Professor Killer mentioned, I think that we need to take such an approach. I wish we had a lot of time for discussion, but we are running late. And I was also impressed by Mr. Ford's presentation on the role of music in promoting peace and coexistence. So that was also a very impressive. All of these participants share their activities and programs, and I think they all come to contribute to creating the kind of future that we want to make. And personally, I'm not trying to be a nationalist, but when you think about the yin and yang design of the Korean flag, I didn't really know the significance of the flag and how it's designed. But nowadays, I reflect on the meaning of yin and yang and how these two opposites are interacting with one another in the Korean flag. So likewise, we have the divided situation, but I think this has a lot of meaning. And the producer Lee Chang-soo talked about different ways of promoting our understanding. And Dr. Shin Dong-sam, of course, our interview didn't go well because of technical issues. We were all inspired by the life of Dr. Shin Dong-sam. I'm sorry I've been going on and on, but what I want to say is that all these conversations were very meaningful. And while we reflect on each other's ideas, we can also make collective progress in our understanding. So I believe it is time to conclude. Thank you so much for your participation. I wish I could spend more time with you, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. So thank you so much.